Okay, so last month we started the last subsection of the section called Motion and Centers. The subsection is called the Centers and Initiation, where we learned more about the quote-unquote inner subtler vortices of the etheric centers. These are the same vortices we learned about earlier that allow for alignment between the astral and Buddhic Shis at the second initiation and the mental and Atmic Shis at the third initiation. Next, DK lists the effects on the centers created by the rod of initiation, including the fact that the fire at the base of the spine is definitely directed to whichever center is the object of special attention, and that the center to be stimulated varies according to the ray or the specialized work of the initiate. We then learned that certain central spokes of a chakra have a close connection with the different spirali in the permanent atoms. And with this statement, we began a mini tutorial on permanent atoms and spirale, where we learned that 1. Permanent atoms form the positive nucleus or germ substance of the sheath that they bring into being. 2. That they are the basis of form building and are literally vibrant points of force. And finally, 3. That they aggregate to themselves and subsequently build into form the negative or third aspect. And this pretty much takes us up to where we left off last time. So let's continue. But first, I want to invite you, as always, to make any comments or if you have any questions at all about the material. The only thing I ask is that you keep your comments relevant to the material that we're working on. Okay, so let's keep going. We're kind of stopped in the middle of this section, so we'll just continue now. Next up, but it must here be remembered that this second aspect is itself dual, and that in considering the permanent atoms, we are dealing with the feminine aspect of the second person. So the soul is both masculine and feminine. The masculine, or positive polarity, is oriented to its triadal source. The feminine to the builders of the personality Shis. And this feminine aspect, we found out in the next sentence, is the source of the spirale. Quote, the spirale, therefore, are but streams of force or second aspect vitality. So spirale are units of second aspect vitality emanating from the feminine or outwardly creative aspect of the triad and infusing its negative third aspect counterpart with vitality. In other words, the substance of the Shis in which it inhabits and controls and vitalizes. And then finally, which circulates geometrically within the circumscribing wall of substance, composed of third aspect force or substance. And in so doing, vitalizes with their second aspect force, the third aspect Shis that they inhabit. This is all a bit technical, but the upshot is that soul energy is carried into the three Shis of the personality, where it continually vitalizes the form aspect with soul energy. And it does this by means of spirale. If you're going to have one takeaway about spirale, it would be that it's that the medium by which second or aspect or soul energy continually infuses the our three sheaths, the mental, astral, and physical sheaths. Okay, continuing our tutorial on permanent atoms and spirale. Yes, Barbara.
Yes, so it reminds me a bit of the top triad of the Kabbalah tree of life,
Right.
of the with the soul has both the absolute, the sun, and the feminine that creates the forms.
Yes, Kether, Chokmah, and Bina are those three that you're speaking of. And Kether is the source. Now, you can apply that. In this case, if we were to apply it here, we would put Kether as the triadal source. And you can, of course, use all three of those as triadal, having the monastic permanent atom in the place of the feminine Bina, or you could drop it down and have the Kether as the entire triadal source, and then break it down to the masculine aspect of the soul being Chokmah, and the feminine aspect of the soul, which sends forth the spirale, as Bina. And I like that analogy in some ways better than the other, though you can build a philosophy around either way of looking at it.
So, what is the feminine force? Is it a form of prana or fohat?
It's the outgoing impulse that resolves itself in the causal body. In other words, the soul, in its masculine orientation, functions in the spiritual triad. As it's feminine, it functions as the causal body. And within that causal body, you have the permanent atoms, and within those, you have the seven spirale, at various levels of activity. So you could say that the spirale are agents of this feminine aspect of the soul, which demonstrates in the formation of the causal body, and that an aspect of that causal body is are the both permanent atoms and the spirale within them. Does that answer your question?
I just am wondering about the origination of the force that
Yeah, yeah,
comes
I
out of
heard
the
that in
causal
your
body.
question. There's seven Fohatic brothers. It would be a form of electrical force that would enable the causal body to be formed. Of course, we're also told that um, it's an accumulation of personality life expressions. That highest aspect of each personality life is stored within the permanent atoms and within the causal body. But all of it is fohatic at one level or another. This would be that quality of mental fire that is the agency of fohat on the mental plane.
And the causal body holds the blueprint for the feminine forms.
Yes, it does. Through the permanent atoms, and by the feminine forms, you mean the three sheaths,
Yeah.
then the permanent atoms, even though the charts that have been given out, show these permanent atoms on the first subplane of the mental, astral, and physical planes, Um, Even though they are made up of that atomic matter of each of those planes, they are enclosed in the causal body because that atomic substance is not is very distinct from the second through seventh subplanes that are beneath that atomic subplane. And in fact, they're a matrix or source of manifestation, not the manifestation itself. For that reason, they actually reside within the causal body, if that makes any sense.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. A wonderful explanation.
Well, you're welcome, Barbara. Anyone else? Yeah, keep them coming. It's always more interesting, you know. Otherwise, we kind of race through the material and even I get left behind, you know. So it's better to, you know, to keep the comments, just keep them relevant to what we're talking about. That's all I ask. Yes, Nadell.
So is it correct to say that the atomic subplane, that would be the first subplane of all the planes, would be the source for that which of the subplanes that come below it?
Yeah,
Okay.
it would be correct. You could say that there is a manifestation within each of the cosmic physical subplanes, you know, the physical, astral, and mental, for example, because there's also the four higher ones. And the source of activity and manifestation within each of those subplanes is the subplane that which is the first subplane where atomic matter is manifests, right? And that uh, it's not substantive in the way that the matter on the second through seventh subplanes of each of those planes is substantive. It maintains, it's more like a blueprint, and it maintains its purity. It cannot be sullied by lower, for instance, thought forms. You can't affect atomic subplane matter with thought forms. You can't affect the astral atomic subplane with any kind of kama manas or kamic activity. You see what I mean? Joe.
Wow, am I trying to get oriented? I'm thinking rays 1 and 2 and hard rays and soft rays and seeing the masculine as the 1 and the feminine as the 2. Also the feminine 2 as impacting spirali within a particular level. No, a particular
Yeah, well, let me play with that a little bit. So within the soul, which is second aspect purely, you have, you know, to put it in ray terms, you have both a first and second subray. The first subray of the second ray soul would orient it upwards towards the triad. The second subray of the second ray soul would orient it towards the causal body. And then an agent of that second subray would be the permanent atoms, would be the spirale within the permanent atoms. The permanent atoms themselves would be third aspect atomic substance that would act as the matrix for the literal forms that would be created in the three sheaths, right? The job of the spirale is to vitalize the forms that are built by that precipitate from the information held within those three permanent atoms. Okay, anyone else?
I could ask one more.
Go ahead.
I'm thinking that perhaps, this is way out of line, but I'm thinking that at perhaps an advanced state, somewhere around the third initiation, that these atomic particles would have the masculine and the feminine hard and soft rays all trying to unify.
Yeah, okay. You could speculate on this. From one point of view, that first atomic subplane is going to be a you could look at it as the first subray of the third ray, because it represents the highest aspect of the form aspect. So, but in all three sheaths, or on all three levels, mental, astral, and physical, it would represent like a first ray sub ray of a third ray expression, because it is essentially form building. But then, in addition to that, you have these spiralae that infuse these forms with second ray vitality. So that's another way of looking at it.
That's beautiful. Thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome. Okay, continuing our tutorial on permanent atoms and spiralae. Could we get a reader? Now, if you would just raise your hand if you're willing to read. If I don't get anybody, I will open my participants list and call on you. And Veronica, go ahead.
Okay, hello.
Hello.
Each of these permanent atoms has its own internal economy, as seen in the spiralae, which are essentially streams of force responding to stimulation and vibration aroused within and without their limiting ring-pass knot. The internal life of the permanent atom and that which animates and produces its activity is the life of the third aspect. The force playing upon it and through it is the life of the second aspect. As evolution proceeds, the intensity of the life forces from within and those which affect it from without grow gradually stronger and stronger, and the light of the permanent atom increases. The petals of the permanent the light of the permanent atom increases, the petals of the lotus unfold, and the spokes of the radiatory fire come into action.
Thank you, Anne Veronica. Okay, so first, each of these permanent atoms has its own internal economy, as seen in the spiralae. That's what makes up the internal economy of the permanent atoms, which are essentially streams of force, talking about the spiralae, responding to stimulation and vibration aroused within and without their limiting ring pass knot. So they emanate a vibratory, second ray vibratory quality, or second aspect vibratory quality from within. And they also respond to stimulation from without. So internal economy refers to the distribution and utilization of energy within a permanent atom. That's what's meant by the term economy, right? How energy is distributed and utilized, thus affecting its electrical, rotational, and vibrational energies. Okay, it's like a little machine, and yet also an organism. This internal economy is controlled by the spiralae, or you could say they are the agents of this, how the energy is distributed and utilized. And they are also the response mechanism of a permanent atom, thus allowing the permanent atom itself to evolve. Okay, so you could say then from this, we could gather that it's the spiralae that are sensitive to the higher vibratory quality that come through a life lived, and and then allow that permanent atom to store that higher vibratory quality, thus continuously updating the field, you could say, of vibrations that are held by the permanent atom. They're the worker bees within the hive that is the permanent atom. Does that make sense? Okay, next. The internal life of the permanent atom, and that which animates and produces its activity, is the life of the third aspect. The force playing upon it and through it is the life of the second aspect. So, the Brahmic or third aspect animates a permanent atom, whereas the spiralae, or the source of the second aspect that vitalizes a permanent atom. This is just the spiralae, as I said before, continuously vitalize and energize the sheath of the permanent atom, which is itself an atomic level substance, and allow it to evolve. The highest active spiralae also serve to stimulate the lower spiralae. And this is important, eventually awaken the as yet dormant higher spiralae. So when we, through our meditation activities and our ability to raise the kundalini and open the chakras, this all translates and is received, the energy is received by the spiralae, who then activate the higher spiralae. The one that we're working with primarily is the fifth. The four lower have to do with form maintenance, and are already completely active just by being a personality, who is reincarnated many times. But that fifth spiralae is oriented towards the soul. And once one is developing a relationship with that soul vibration, that through the fourth spiralae awakens this fifth higher spiralae, which of course then controls the lower four. Yeah. Thoughts or questions? Yay, Tom.
Yeah. I don't know if I'm following, but could you say that the spirally, the atoms, when they are lines of force, so they would also resonate to the sub-levels of the level in question. So, for example, the permanent atom of the emotional plane would, the strings would be linked to the all the sub-levels of the emotional level, and that's the way it works.
It would be, first of all, the source of those levels, and then it would receive impressions from the activity that the indwelling jiva plays out on those levels, right? It would be receptive to them, to the higher qualities. For instance, in the astral, would be the aspirational levels would stimulate the spiralae of the astral permanent atom.
So in a way, there would be an equivalence of the state of evolution of the human being. So when certain spiralae are activated, it would mean that also that individual would then control the different sub-levels of
Very much.
the level. Yeah,
Yes. Yeah, very much so. Yeah, as the fifth spirale awakens, there is soul contact, and the astral is beginning to be transformed and become, that what DK describes as this calm, clear, purified, um, uh, like a body of water that reflects the Buddhic plane rather than being the source of activity itself. That's a like a third initiation level, but that's the goal. And then the fifth spirale is, you could say, running the show. With the sixth and seventh spirale, monadic activity starts to come in. They're just being awakened. So that would come, say, at the fourth initiation, for instance. Then you have that yet higher spirale dominating the economy of the permanent atom. It's all pretty amazing, really. Okay, thank you, Tom. Okay. Finally, as evolution proceeds, the intensity of the life forces from within and those which affect it from without, we're talking about the spirale, grows gradually stronger and stronger, and the light of the permanent atoms increase. So you see the connection there. The petals of the lotus unfold, and the spokes of the radiatory fire come into action. Okay, said spokes being, quote, certain of the central spokes of the chakra that was described earlier in the introductory comments here. Since the spirale govern the eternal economy of the permanent atom, it is these little streams of energy that are responsible for increasing a permanent atom's internal light. This passage also reveals the mechanism by which the petals of the lotus unfold, or spokes of the wheel. He switches metaphors back and forth. So though DK is here referencing the chakras, the term lotus also applies to the egoic lotus, whose unfoldment is deeply interconnected with the increased activity of the chakras. Again, the spokes referenced in the last phrase, quote, and the spokes of the radiatory fire come into action, are the same spokes described in the text we were studying before our mini tutorial, which states, the center has its activity intensified, its rate of evolution increased, and certain of the central spokes of the wheel brought into more active radiance. And here's the important line. These spokes, which are also called by some students lotus petals, have a close connection with the different spirale in the permanent atoms. So there's the connection. Yes, Barbara.
We're told that at death, the permanent atoms are withdrawn like a string of pearls, and that this string of pearls identifies the overall quality of the life. And so it sounds like these spirali are connected, very connected with evolution of the soul. So, but it seems like it might take a while in a new life for all of this to manifest. So do certain conditions have to be there in a new life for the atoms and the spirali and the spokes to reactivate?
Yeah, I think it's very much tied with recapitulation. You know, I mean, a child is born with the higher quality sheaths already in place, but he won't be able to consciously, um, you could say, recognize and wield the potency that is inherent in those sheaths um, until he has recapitulated the physical, astral, and mental stages of development, right? I mean, you know, you could have like a tremendous mental sheath, but it's not going to be um, demonstrated, you know, by the 5-year-old, except for once in a while it is. You know, we get these child geniuses who just break through anyway, you know, but for the most part, it's, yeah, for the most part, it's uh, very much controlled through the recapitulatory process, which doesn't fully end until you're age 35. Though by then, you know, especially at those last 2 7-year periods, you know, 21 through 35, you would have, I think, full access to the potency of the spiralae as they are demonstrating through the permanent atoms of the sheaths that you inhabit, right? Yes, Magda.
Yes, last time we talked about the consequentiality toward the opening of the petals. And so tonight we're learning about the fifth petal where we are like getting to the Buddhic plane, if I'm not wrong, and then further on the leftover petals toward the Atman. So my question is, could you define more how this consequentiality toward the identicality works through the zodiac and through the wheels, the reverse wheels, but how is this consequentiality of the opening of the petals? Meaning 5, now we are here learning on the Buddhic plane.
Yeah, I think.
And then how, like, if you can do me some reference on this technical thing, if it's possible anyway.
Well, it's we can speculate. You know, the thing is, DK tends to develop these systems independently of each other. He doesn't do a lot of cross-referencing. He doesn't say, for instance, you know, when the fifth spirale is coming into a particular level of strength, that happens when, and then, you know, giving you a number of other references. He develops, you know, he does some cross-referencing, especially with initiations, but often he develops these systems separately. But that, you know, nonetheless, I would say, first of all, just right off the bat, that the fifth spirale and the fifth petal of the egoic lotus. Now, you know, that's not to be confused with the petals that, or the spokes of the wheels that are the chakras, you know, but the petals within the egoic lotus. When during the opening of that petal, one is becoming very, very soul aware. And that is a consequence of the bringing into activity the fifth spirale. Also, there's going to be the Buddhic plane, the vortices in the chakras of the Buddhic sheath are going to begin to respond to the astral purification that goes on at the second initiation. Now, at this point, one is not Buddhically conscious, but there's work already, there's activity already coming about. And then the same thing would be true between the mental and the atmic. And when that comes about, you're looking at the sixth petal of the egoic lotus, and you're also looking at awakening the sixth spirale, which is monadically alive or active. It is that agency which links us to monad instead of the fifth to the soul. So those are, a couple of correlations. There's many different systems of describing, like, where are you in terms of the activation of the triangles of your Kundalini at that point? I would guess when when the fifth is fully active, that you're in the stage of fusing the two triangles of matter, which are the pranic triangles and the latent triangle of matter, those two with the triangle of mental force, which comes from the head centers. So you're already circulating the fire between those three sets of triangles, but unless he actually says this is happening when this is happening, it becomes speculation. Nonetheless, the more acquainted you become with these different ways of looking at evolution, the more you can kind of intuit how they interrelate. So I hope that helps a little bit, Magda.
Yeah, a lot. Thank you very much. Yes.
Yeah, okay, good. All right, let's see. Where in the heck am I here? Right. Okay, so 1 second. I need to highlight a word before I go off on a long conversation with you guys, because I get I get lost. Okay, there we go. Okay. So, as a result of what we just learned about the spirale, we may now hypothesize that there is a coordinated effort brought about through initiation between the, quote, central spokes of the wheel that are brought into more active radiance, and a stimulation initially of the fifth spirale and in subsequent initiations of the sixth and seventh within the three permanent atoms, resulting in an increased influence of the soul within the personality vehicle. And I have to add also, when you're talking about sixth and seventh, a flow through from the monad. FYI, there is also a quote in Esoteric Psychology, Volume 2, in the section on the technique of fusion, that refers to these central spokes. And by the way, I'm going to be giving a presentation on this topic, the technique of fusion, during the raised workshop at the conference in May. And there's a whole other way of looking at or describing the process of becoming, and trying to find the correlations between what happens during this technique and what happens, in terms of like the raising the Kundalini, the activation of the different spirale, etc. So, could we get a reader for this, please? Just anybody, please raise your hand. Thank you, Nadal.
One half of the center, the outer half, therefore one half of the lotus petals, is brought into increased activity upon the probationary path. The other half begins its intensified vibratory activity upon the path of discipleship. But the intensification of the center of the lotus, though the one life controls both soul and body, only takes place when the two later techniques of fusion and of duality are carried successfully forward.
Okay, so this is part of his introduction, in a way of a bridging between, activity within the chakras and the material he's about to cover, which is these two techniques of fusion and duality. Okay, so we already know, even though he doesn't talk about it much, but he does talk about the center part of a chakra and the outer part of a chakra. Now, I think almost certainly we're talking about concentricity rather than, like the top half and the lower half. I think it's like the inner quote half and the outer quote half. And he doesn't say much about this division, but I think we have some clue as to this in our in what he's given us about these inner spokes that are responsive to the spirale. That I think would be this inner half, that he's talking about here, which then demonstrate once that, that's the receptive half that then demonstrate through, you could say, a fuller display through the outer half of a chakra. That's just a guess, but I'm thinking that could be how this works. Anyway, just a little side note. Okay, next, through their stimulation, that there meaning certain spokes of the wheel under stimulation at a particular initiation, there comes into play one or more of the corresponding spirale in the permanent atoms or the three lower planes. After the third initiation, a corresponding stimuli takes place in the permanent atoms of the triad, leading to the coordination of the Buddhic vehicle and the transference of the lower polarization into the higher. So I'll get to you in a minute, Joe. So all three lower permanent atoms are affected by the coordinated stimulation of one, certain inner spokes within a particular chakra, two, initially the fifth and later on the sixth and seventh spirale. We might hypothesize that stimulation of the seventh spirale occurs at the third or possibly fourth initiation, which then awakens the permanent atoms of the spiritual triad, shown here. We might also hypothesize that it is the stimulation of what DK calls, quote unquote, certain spokes of a center that allows for the transference of energy from lower to higher chakras. So I think the spirale are very much involved in in this transference through their connection via the inner spokes of each chakra, right? I mean, it seems like this is very technical and we're getting a whole lot of information, but if you think about it, if you think of the information we're not getting, for instance, which spirale are involved in the lowest chakra? Well, we may guess that the very lowest, first and second, possibly spirale, that the lower chakras, are up through the fourth spirale. So what is the mechanism of the spirale of the transference of the solar plexus to the heart, for instance, something we're all involved in, or from the sacral center to the throat center. Yeah, I call this as base of spine. It's actually below here. I would think that there's very specific and definite spirale, and there's a kind of a point of activation of the spirale that comes into being where these transferences become very natural. They're like, it just tips the scale towards the transference of energy, right? Okay, Joe.
You picked up on my thought. Basically, I was thinking that you start from the second base chakra and it goes to the throat, the fifth. And then that's in the individual. And the fifth, of course, is, I think, the throat center for the planetary logos. And I believe it carries on into the sun as well.
Okay. Yeah, it's fascinating to, imaginatively further develop, and it's good exercise because it allows us to flesh out our understanding of how the chakras, the inner petals, the permanent atoms, and the spirale interrelate, right? Okay. Okay, next up, could we get a reader, please? Thank you, Gordon.
Of the rod of initiation, the downflow of force from the ego to the personality is tripled. Direction of that force being dependent on whether the centers receiving attention are the etheric or the astral at the first and second initiations, or whether the initiate is standing before the Lord of the world. In the latter case, his mental centers or their corresponding force vortices on higher levels will receive stimulation. When the world teacher initiates at the first and second initiations, the direction of the triadal force is turned to the vivification of the heart and the throat centers, and the ability to synthesize force of the lower centers is greatly increased. When the one initiator applies the rod of his power, the downflow is from the monad and through the throat, and though the throat and heart centers intensify vibration as a response, the main direction of the force is to the 7 head centers, and finally, at liberation, to the radiant head center above, and synthesizing the lesser 7 head centers.
Thank you, Gordon. Okay, first, by the application of the rod. So this is the third in the list. We just covered the center has its activities intensified, the rate of evolution increased. So now we get to this very important point. By the application of the rod, the downflow of force from the ego to the personality is tripled. The direction of that force being dependent upon whether the centers receiving attention are the etheric or the astral at the first and second initiations, or whether the initiate is standing before the Lord of the world. Okay, an important point is here being made. Is that whatever the energetic effect of the rod itself, it also opens the floodgates from the soul. It triples the downflow of force from the ego to the personality. We also learned that at this first initiation, the physical etheric centers are stimulated. At the second initiation, the astral centers receive stimulation. And presumably, by extension, we can hypothesize that at the third initiation, the mental centers are stimulated. In each case, by a tripling of the egoic force. One wonders, is that tripling just happened once at the first initiation, or is there a further tripling at the second and a further tripling at the third? You would think it would have to be the latter case, because in each case there's an algorithmic increase in potency. Janet's joining us. Okay, so Taking the astral vehicle as an example, it's easy to see why astral purification is essential before the second initiation can be administered, for without it, the matter of the lower subplanes of the astral plane, and along with it one's desire nature, would be stimulated by this triple force, creating, if the necessary purification has not been accomplished, a far worse situation for the initiate than before initiation. Of course, this never happens because they can see whether the necessary purification has been accomplished. But this reminds me of the idea of the man sweeping the devils out of his house, and then it's a Bible verse, very obscure Bible verse, and then he turns around and there's 7 new devils within it. So, but we're protected, by the watching hierarchy from, unless we take matters into our own hand and use artificial means such as certain breathing exercises to try to raise our Kundalini fire, then we can end up in a similar situation, though it wouldn't be happening through initiation. Anyway, next, the latter case is mental centers or their corresponding force vortices on higher levels will receive stimulation. So again, we have this reference, right? Confirmation that the rod stimulates the mental plane at the third initiation. And again, we have a reference to the corresponding Buddhic and Atmic vortices on higher levels. Remember also that the nature of the stimulation is determined by one's ray type. For example, whereas a 5th ray type might have their mental centers stimulated, 2nd ray types might have their heart vortices in their Buddhic vehicle stimulated, and 1st ray types might have the head centers in either their mental or Atmic vehicles stimulated. The specifics of this are not given. It's just hinted at, with the term depending on one's ray type, but that's barely tells us anything about how that actually works. Next, when the world teacher initiates at the first and second initiations, the direction of the triadal force is turned to the vivification of the heart and throat centers, and the ability to synthesize the force of the lower centers is greatly increased. First of all, note that DKs uses the term direction of the triadal force, whereas in an earlier reference to the same 2 initiations, he spoke of the downflow of force from the ego to the personality, suggesting that it is the ego on triadal levels that is the source of this tripling of the downflow. The order of vivification given by DK suggests that the heart is stimulated at the first and the throat center at the second initiation. And connection between the heart and the first initiation is borne out by one of the names of the first initiation, called the birth of the Christ in the heart. However, in raised initiations, there's a strong argument for the idea that it is the throat center that is vivified at the first initiation. Quote, "You have likewise been told that the energy of the sacral center, the center most implicated and active at the time of the first initiation, has to be transmuted and raised to the throat center, thereby transforming the physical creative act into the creative process of producing the good, the beautiful, and the true." So there's a definite link here to the first initiation. Perhaps both centers are somewhat vivified at both initiations, but with one center receiving the greater stimulus. I've always been under the impression that it's the first initiation that moves the sacral to the throat, and the second initiation, because it deals with the astral, that moves the energy, the astral, which is tied so much to the solar plexus, that moves the energy from there to the heart. But who knows, perhaps one's ray type and even one's outer activities, the particular work one is doing, influences, which centers are stimulated. Okay, and finally, when the one initiator applies the rod of his power, the downflow is from the monad, and though the throat and heart intensify vibration as a response, the main direction of the force is to the 7 head centers, and finally, at liberation, to the radiant head center above, and synthesizing the lesser head centers. So the third degree, which is the first initiation over which the one initiator, the Lord of the world, presides, is pivotal as it relates soul to monad. Atma has been earlier contacted, but under the regime of the monad, the one initiator draws down monadic force for the stimulation of the 7 head centers. Though all 9 initiations sequentially liberate one from the trammels of matter, the third initiation results in the complete liberation of the man from the pull of substance in the 3 worlds. And the fourth degree liberates the central life or fire from the causal body. And, when I was reading this, I saw for the first time when the one initiator applies the rod of his power. That really struck me this time through. I hadn't really seen that reference come forth. So it's like the power that the rod is transferring is the Sanat Kumara's power. The rod, then it would seem, is an agent, an instrument to control and very specifically define how this power is directed into the initiate, but that the power itself is his power, the one initiator. Yeah, I just saw that. Okay. Any thoughts or questions about this stuff? All right, next up, can we get a reader, please? Volunteer. If not, I'll call on you. Let's see here. Ben, would you be willing to read for us?
Sure. The centers at initiation receive a fresh access of vibratory capacity and of power. And this results in the exoteric life as, first, a sensitiveness and refinement of the vehicles, which may result at first in much suffering and to the initiate, but which produces a capacity to respond to contacts that far outweighs the incidental pain. Second, a development of psychic faculty that again may lead to temporary distress, but which eventually causes a recognition of the oneself in all selves, which is the goal of the endeavor. Third, a burning away through a gradual arousing of Kundalini and its correct geometrical progression through the etheric web. This produces a resultant continuity of consciousness, which enables the initiate to consciously utilize time as a factor in the plans of evolution. Fourth, the gradual grasp of the law of vibration as an aspect of the basic law of building. The initiate learns consciously to build, to manipulate through matter for the perfecting of the plans of the Logos, to work in mental essence and to apply the law on mental levels and thereby affect the physical plane.
Thank you, Ben. Okay, first, the centers at initiation receive a fresh access of vibratory capacity and of power, and this results in the exoteric life, that is the outer incarnated human being, as in that these, then he gives us these 4 points. So all of them being an effect of this fresh access of vibratory capacity, right? So first, a sensitiveness and refinement of the vehicles. That would be the mental, astral, and physical vehicles, which may result at first in much suffering to the initiate, but which produces a capacity to respond to contacts that far outweighs the incidental pain. So the fresh access of vibratory capacity is opened by the rod of initiation, but at least in the early initiations, comes through the soul. Here are 2 possible sources of suffering, one mundane, the other applying at a more advanced level. So first, if an aspirant makes significant progress during a given lifetime, reflecting on errors made through lack of consciousness earlier in life can cause great pain. At a higher point of evolution, one may experience what Krishnamurti dubbed sacred pains, which he described as intense states of consciousness that involve a profound sense of pressure within the mind. The quote-unquote pain that Krishnamurti describes is a result of one's struggle to transcend ordinary thought and enter a state of pure awareness, or I should say pure awareness. And the vibratory field of that pure awareness creates pain because one isn't yet accustomed to, in the brain, physical plane consciousness of working with that high vibratory level. And it actually creates, Krishnamurti described it as this intense, the sense of intense pressure on, in his mental awareness. An old commentary gives us further insight. Could we get a reader, please? Let's see here. Yes, Maria Christina, thank you.
The cross of many changes, the mutable cross, continues with its whirling, carrying crucified thereon the form of a man in whom is found the seed of all illusion. But from the cross whereon he has been slain, e'en though he knew it not, the man climbs down and feels his way with pain and many tears onto another cross. a cross of blinding light, of fiery pain, of bitter woe, and yet the cross of liberation. It is a stationary cross fixed in the heavens and guarded by the angel.
Okay, so it's a slightly different take on this pain aspect, but in a way, in both cases, one is not yet accustomed to the higher vibratory field that you're encountering. This also includes the pain of transition, of losing your orientation towards the third aspect and shifting it to the second aspect. That it can be a very painful process just in and of itself. Okay, blinding light. Here, he talks about, where is it? Yeah, a cross of blinding light, fiery pain, bitter woe, and yet a cross of liberation. So blinding light is associated with the Taurian arm of the fixed cross, fiery pain with Leo, bitter woe with Scorpio, and liberation with Aquarius. The pain of receiving a fresh access of vibratory capacity, which comes along with the mounting of the fixed cross, produces a capacity to respond to contacts that far outweigh the incidental pain. The contacts being, for example, the still small voice of the soul, the influence of the esoteric rulers of all the signs, impress from the new group of world servers, the influence of the ashrams, which one is becoming increasingly responsive to, and finally, eventually, the touch of one's master. In every case, you have two kinds of pains. The impetus to step onto a new way, and therefore the pain of letting go of what you have developed up to that time. And then that direct pain that Krishnamurti talked about, which is this sense, in his case, it was a sense, he felt it as a sense of pressure. So there's, both of those. Okay, next, second, a development of psychic faculty that again may lead to temporary distress, but which eventually causes a recognition of the one self in all selves, which is the goal of endeavor. So psychism includes the ability to employ the astral and mental senses, such as clairaudience and clairvoyance. But not all psychic development is spiritual. In light of the soul, DK tells us that lower psychism is often a result of the activity of the solar plexus, producing awareness of the astral plane, which is both undesirable and dangerous. Higher psychism, on the other hand, is soul-guided. Externalization of the hierarchy gives this tabulation, which compares the two levels of psychism. So you have higher psychism, the divine, controlled, positive, intelligently applied, resulting in mediatorship. And then you have lower psychism, which is animal, uncontrolled, negative, automatic, and results in mediumship. By the way, both of these are very much underlined at this time of the full moon in Pisces, where we have this extraordinary stellium of Saturn at the north node of the moon, the sun, and Neptune, which is the you could say it's the planet of both these forms of psychism that develops the kind of sensitivity that results in this psychism in either case. And so this is very, very strong right now. Okay. Third. Okay, Nadell.
This reminds me of I think it was in a different webinar where it was mentioned that one of the groups that is still of the Lemurians still on Earth are the Aborigines in Australia. And it's interesting that I've read many times that they know when a tsunami is coming and they just know to just get up and move up to higher ground. And
That's
it
right.
seems that's that psychism that they have.
Yeah, really good example. Yeah, I would think that those who are now incarnating into, for instance, the Australian Aboriginal tribes, as well as certain African Aboriginal tribes, um, are doing so knowing that they're going to be contacting um, other levels of human society. That wasn't so much the case in the 30s well, in 1925, when DK wrote this book, and later in the 30s, where they still were quite isolated, even though contact had been made. So I think even at this 100-year period, 80, 90, 100-year period, that that tribal orientation towards lower psychism is probably changing. However, I think that they also keep it alive through their shamans and shamanic work. Um, and, you know, I studied once with an Apache shaman, shamaness, I should say. And it's definitely a mixture of both types of psychism. You develop these outer sensitivities, but you also are reaching upwards towards the soul. And so, it's a very complex reality in terms of how it impacts people that we would normally think of as being tribal, or Aboriginal. Okay. Wait a minute here. What am I doing? Oh, yeah. Okay, so we're here at third. A burning away through a gradual arousing of Kundalini and its correct geometrical progression through the etheric web. This produces a resultant continuity of consciousness, which enables the initiate consciously to utilize time as a factor in the plans of evolution. So again, this is a result of this access of fresh vibratory capacity and power, right? So one of the effects is this burning away of the web and the protective web and the arousing of the Kundalini. So as the Kundalini fire rises, it circulates between the centers in triangular formation. You may remember from earlier in TCF that the geometrical progression of the fire between the centers is determined by one's ray type. DK uses the term correct to mean soul stimulated, as opposed to premature arousal of the Kundalini fire through certain Hatha yoga practices, which can have disastrous results. Continuity of consciousness, which comes about as a result of the Kundalini fire burning away the etheric web, advances the initiate in many ways. This passage from Dina 1 describes continuity of consciousness during death, or as DK here describes it, the discarding of the vehicle. Could we get a reader, please? Let's see here. Okay, Joe, go ahead.
I would like to say at this point to all of you who have remained steadfast, even if perforce inactive, that I would ask you as life proceeds and you face eventually and inevitably the discarding of the vehicle, to hold increasingly on to your knowledge of the hierarchy and thus to pass over to the other side with complete dedication to the hierarchical plan. This is not simply a suggestion on my part. It is an attempt on my part to call to your attention the concept of a spiritual continuity of knowledge and of a rightly oriented attitude. Thus, time will not be lost. You can, if you so choose, each and all of you, attain a true continuity of consciousness, and it is one of the factors which will serve to hold this group of disciples together.
Thank you, Joe. Yeah, actually, this was a bit eyebrow rising for me because normally continuity of consciousness is comes about, at least the teaching is, comes about sometime before sometime as a result of the third initiation. Here, since DK is addressing disciples and initiates of the first and second degrees, he may be addressing, for instance, his own group of disciples, which he tells us are all first and second degree. In fact, one wasn't even a first degree yet. One was preparing for the third, that was a Saggioli. But for the most part, they're first and second degree types. So this passage suggests the possibility of holding on to the knowledge gained during one's life, even before the third initiation. Finally, we have fourth, a gradual grasp of the law of vibration as an aspect of the basic law of building. The initiate learns consciously to build, to manipulate thought matter for the perfecting of the plans of the logos, to work in mental essence, and to apply the law on mental levels and thereby affect the physical plane. Okay, so understanding the law of vibration reveals the nature and quality of those substances that are appropriate for the form building process. For only matter characterized by certain vibratory qualities can be used in forms that will foster further evolution. So this ability to experience vibratory quality, it's like a sentient ability, a higher sentiency. I associate it partly with psychometry, to sense and feel a quality or vibratory quality. And therefore you can discard that which is inappropriate and include that which is will be effective within the form you're building. Manipulating thought matter for the perfecting of the plans of the logos suggests an extreme sensitivity to the vibratory quality of thought forms, which in turn allows one to creatively build those thought forms that further the plan, and to dissipate, at the same time, through the magical arts, those thought forms that hinder the plan. At each initiation, we are aided in this endeavor by a quote-unquote fresh access of vibratory capacity received through the application of the rod. And I might add that when this is all we want to do, and we have no thought of any kind of personality aggrandizement, but when we are absolutely in our whole being dedicated to furthering the plans of the logos, that's when we will pass through the door of initiation, provided the karma has been taken care of and the purification has been undergone. Okay, next up, could we get a reader, please? Let's see how we're doing on time. We can still do this one. Magda, would you read for us?
Yes.
Thank you.
Motion originates cosmically on cosmic mental levels, and in the microcosm, the same order will be seen. There is an occult hint here that will reveal much if pondered upon. An initiation at the moment of the application of the rod, the initiate consciously realizes the meaning of the law of attraction in form building and in the synthesis of the three fires. Upon his ability to retain that realization and himself to apply the law will depend his power and progress. E. By the application of the rod, the fire of Kundalini is aroused and its upward progress directed. The fire at the base of the spine and the fire of mind are directed along certain roads or triangles by the action of the rod as it moves in a specified manner. There is a definite occult reason under the laws of electricity behind the known fact that every initiate presented to the initiator is accompanied by two of the masters who stand one on either side of him. The three of them together form a triangle, which makes the work possible.
Thank you, Magda. Okay, first, motion originates cosmically on cosmic mental levels. And in the microcosm, the same order will be seen. There is an occult hint here that will reveal much if pondered on. Okay, so cosmic motion brings all cycles into active demonstration. Thus, through movement, the process of descending into matter and later ascending into the higher subplanes of the cosmic physical plane is initiated on the mental plane, both cosmically and systemically. This is why stilling the mind reveals the realm of being. From a high cosmic perspective, movement, though cosmically inescapable, actually distorts the face of reality, for it introduces both time and the illusion of separation. Systemically, movement on planes above the mental exists, but is of a different order than motion on the plane of mind. Those of us who wish to move the lower worlds in accordance with the plan must be able to create thought forms that ground soul purpose in the lower quaternary. This is white magic, which is implemented on the higher mental plane. Next, an initiation, at the moment of the application of the rod, the initiate consciously realizes the meaning of the law of attraction in form building and in the synthesis of the three fires. Upon his ability to retain that realization and himself to apply the law will depend his power and progress. So the law of attraction is actually a dual law encompassing both also the law of repulsion. Thus it is centripetal and centrifugal, both attracting and discarding material. Since the rod of initiation triples the force streaming in from the second aspect, it naturally stimulates our consciousness, our conscious realization of how the law of attraction is used, both in form building and as a synthesizing agency of the fires of matter, mind, and spirit. I mean, suddenly you will, after initiation, one would find themselves acutely aware of their ability to create, right? And that thought form building would come quite easily, and that its effects in the outer world would be very much known to the now initiate, and of course with that comes a tremendous responsibility. At any rate, all this is in keeping with the purpose of the plan in this second aspect solar system and upon this essentially second-rate planet. Also important here is the statement that retention of the stimulation gained through initiation is not automatic, suggesting that the initiate may not remember the realizations impressed upon him or her during the initiation ceremony. Elsewhere, DK tells us that often first initiations, the first initiation is not remembered, though he goes on to say that the subsequent initiations usually are. The second, if not taken in the same lifetime, can be temporarily forgotten. The third, never. Once you reach the third initiation, you know your initiate and in what standing. Okay. Next, continuing with the results achieved through initiation in connection with the sitters. E, by the application of the rod, the fire of Kundalini is aroused and its upward progress directed. The fire at the base of the spine and the fire of mind are directed along certain routes or triangles by the action of the rod as it moves in a specified manner. So we've learned some of this before, but new here is the idea that the way in which the rod is moved determines how the fire at the base of the spine and the fire of mind are, quote, directed along certain routes or triangles. This emphasizes the intricate nature of the process and the extraordinary control. It's like surgical control needed by the initiator. Okay, and finally, there is a definite occult reason under the law of electricity behind the known fact that every initiate presented to the initiator is accompanied by two of the masters who stand one on either side of him. The three of them together form a triangle, which makes the work possible. So the best source of info on the actual process of initiation comes from Initiation Human and Solar, which greatly expand on what is here presented. In fact, I discovered that a lot of what's written here is lifted straight out of that earlier book. He wrote Initiation Human and Solar in 1922 and this in 1925, and he just copy-pasted it into this manuscript with a few subtle changes. So we'll read this next time. We'll pick up at this point.